Ma'am, could you be my mommy? Just for one day. The words sliced through the noise of the busy Starbucks on Park Avenue like a sudden hush of winter wind. Eleanor Grant looked up from her lukewarm cappuccino, her second one remade, wrung in less than 10 minutes, and blinked. A small boy stood in front of her. He couldn't have been more than 6. Hair, tousled like he'd been running a Green Army-style jacket 2 sizes too big, swallowed his thin frame. But what truly stopped her, what froze Eleanor Grant, CEO of Grant Equity Holdings, a woman known for making grown men stammer, were his eyes. Bright, clear, heartbreakingly sincere. Tommy, a breathless voice, shouted behind him. A man, tall, scruffy, and clearly exhausted, rushed over a crumpled Instacart bag slung over one shoulder. His hoodie was damp from the drizzle outside, and the sneakers on his feet had clearly seen better years. He looked like someone who had forgotten what sleep felt like. "I'm so sorry," he gasped, pulling the boy gently behind him. "He runs off sometimes. I just lost my wallet and then a delivery got canceled, and God, I must have looked away for a second." Eleanor said nothing. Instead, she looked down at the boy, still holding on to the hem of her wool coat. "Why would you want me to be your mom?" she asked, her voice low and steady, though something in her chest gave an unfamiliar tug. "Because tomorrow's parent day at school," the boy Tommy answered without hesitation. "All the kids are bringing their moms or dads. I don't have a mom, but you look like someone who'd be nice, even if you looked kinda mad at your coffee." There was a beat of silence. Then 2. The woman at the register froze mid-swipe. A couple sipping lattes near the window had gone still. One teenager in the corner slowly lifted his phone to record. Jack, the father, flushed crimson. "Ma'am, really, I'm sorry. He just says stuff sometimes. You don't need to feel—" "What's his name?" Eleanor interrupted softly. The man blinked. "Tommy. Tommy Miller." She turned her gaze back to the boy. "And what school? Eastfield Elementary. First grade." "Room 1A, he said proudly. "Parent day starts at 10 a.m. Jack stepped forward, suddenly wary. "Look, I don't want any trouble. You've probably got a million things to do and places to be. I'm not asking for your resume," Eleanor said curtly. She knelt, leveling her gaze with the boy's. "Do you think I'd make a good pretend mommy?" Tommy grinned. "Only for a day, I think you'd be awesome." Eleanor nodded once. "All right then. Just for a day?" Jack gawked. "Wait, really? You don't have to." But she was already walking away, heels clicking sharply across the tile. She didn't look back. Not when whispers chased her like perfume. Not even when someone muttered, "Isn't that Eleanor Grant?" What just happened? Jack wondered, staring at the woman who had just promised to show up in his son's life, if only for a morning. That night, Eleanor stared into her untouched glass of wine on the 12th floor of her Central Park penthouse. City lights glittered like tiny fires beyond the window, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. "You're thinking about the boy." Her assistant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "I'm thinking about how hard it is to get a cappuccino made right," she replied dryly. Then after a pause, his eyes. His eyes. "They reminded me of Elise," Eleanor murmured. The name fell like a stone in water, small but rippling far. Elise, her younger sister, gone 4 years now, taken by the invisible hands of postpartum depression. The baby, too, had been lost. Eleanor had buried them both, and with them every flicker of softness left in her. Since then, she'd built walls, not homes. Made deals, not memories. But Tommy had asked her to stay, just for a day, and somewhere inside that question something had cracked. 10:00 a.m. sharp. Eastfield Elementary. Eleanor stepped out of her sleek black Range Rover in a navy wool coat, understated but immaculate. No designer labels shouting for attention. No entourage. Just her. And in her hand a small bouquet of white daisies and a single cupcake in a paper box. She spotted Tommy instantly standing near the school fence, fidgeting with his backpack straps, glancing at each car that pulled up with growing disappointment. Then his eyes lit up. "You came." He ran to her, beaming so brightly she could almost feel it against her skin. "I thought maybe you were just being nice," he said breathlessly. "I don't make promises I don't intend to keep," she said, brushing a lock of hair from his face. He grabbed her hand, no hesitation, and pulled her past the gates. Children laughed. Parents waved. A banner hung across the schoolyard. "Welcome to Parents' Day because love makes a family." As Eleanor crossed that threshold, something shifted. She thought she was showing up just for a little boy. She had no idea. She was about to find something she hadn't even known she was missing. It was supposed to be 1 hour. That's what she told herself. Eleanor Grant didn't do children. She didn't do glitter glue juice boxes or sing-alongs. She did mergers. She did numbers. And if there was one thing she never did, it was unpredictability. Yet here she was, sitting cross-legged on a tiny blue rug inside a brightly lit classroom that smelled of crayons and apple juice. Her posture was stiff, her knees protested, and the paper crown someone had taped to her head itched like a curse. But the boy beside her, he was glowing. "This is my mommy," Tommy announced proudly to a group of wide-eyed first graders. Then a beat later he added, "Just for today." A ripple of giggles followed, and Eleanor heard a few other kids whisper, "Wow, she's pretty. She smells like vanilla and something fancy. Do all mommies wear high heels?" She almost corrected them, told them she wasn't anyone's mother, wasn't even remotely maternal, but then she saw Tommy look up at her hopeful as if he was waiting to see if she'd vanish. So she stayed. And strangely, it didn't feel like charity. It didn't feel like playing dress-up. It felt grounding. They painted with watercolors. Hers looked more like a stock graph melting than a rainbow, but Tommy called it super cool. They built towers with foam blocks. Hers kept collapsing. They ate cupcakes, and Tommy asked if she ever had lunch without talking about stocks. "Rarely," she replied. "Even my dog has a portfolio." He burst out laughing. "You have a dog?" She hesitated. Had. The classroom blurred for a moment. A tiny sting pressed behind her eyes. She hadn't said Max's name aloud in 3 years. The golden retriever had belonged to Elise. He passed not long after she did, as if he'd been waiting for permission to let go. Eleanor shook the memory off just in time for Story Circle. The teacher, Ms. Lopez, handed her a book titled Super Dads and Magical Moms. "Would you like to read to the class?" she asked. Eleanor opened her mouth to decline. She was already pushing her comfort zone enough for one day. But Tommy handed her the book, looking as if it was the only thing that mattered. So she read. Her voice started stiff, too formal, too rehearsed. But as the children leaned in, eyes wide, giggles erupting at the funny bits, gasps at the dramatic turns, she softened. Her voice found a rhythm that didn't feel like a boardroom presentation. It felt natural. Halfway through, Tommy curled up against her side, head resting gently against her arm. She froze. Not because it was uncomfortable, because it wasn't. Because it felt too much like something she didn't know she had missed. "You smell like cookies," he mumbled, half asleep. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Across the room, Jack Miller stood quietly near the door. He had arrived 10 minutes ago but hadn't made a sound. He watched as his son leaned into Eleanor like he had always belonged there. Eleanor didn't notice him until story time ended and the kids scattered. That's when she looked up and their eyes met. He gave a slight nod, cautious but grateful. She returned it, but something in her throat tightened. Later, while the children were playing with finger puppets and paper masks, Eleanor walked out into the hallway needing air. Jack followed her out. "I didn't expect you to really come," he said, his voice low and hoarse as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a while. "I said I would," she replied simply. He glanced at her. "A lot of people say things." There was no bitterness in his voice, just weariness. The kind that comes from too many promises broken too many times. Eleanor studied him for the first time. Really looked. He wasn't just tired, he was threadbare. But beneath the stubble and worn hoodie, there was a quiet strength, something solid and deeply human, something the polished men in her world lacked entirely. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked. "Since he was 2, Jack replied. "His mom. My wife passed after a long illness. I've been playing every role ever since." She didn't offer condolences. She hated platitudes. Instead, she asked, "Do you have help?" He shook his head. "Some friends try, but everyone's got their own lives. I work gigs, delivery handyman stuff. I do what I can." He laughed under his breath. "You ever try gluing a science fair volcano together at 3 a.m. while your kid has a fever and there's a busted radiator leaking on the floor?" She didn't laugh back. She only said with quiet honesty, "No, I haven't." A pause stretched between them. Then Jack looked at her sideways. "You didn't have to say yes, you know, to Tommy." "I know." "Then why did you?" Eleanor took a long moment before answering. "I think." She started voice softer than she meant it to be. "I think I remembered what it felt like to want something and be too small to ask for it." He asked anyway. Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds like him." From inside, Tommy's laughter rang out pure, unfiltered joy. Jack smiled even as his shoulders sagged. "He's different, you know," he said. "Feels the world harder than other kids. Notices what's missing." Eleanor's gaze didn't leave the door. "So do I." Jack glanced at her again, but this time with something closer to understanding than curiosity. Then he cleared his throat. "You're welcome to stay. You don't have to. But he'd like it." "I already told him just one day," she said, turning to leave. But even as the words left her lips, her feet didn't move. She looked back through the glass window of the classroom where Tommy was now showing her painting to another kid, beaming. That child had claimed her as something she never thought she could be, and for reasons she couldn't quite name, she hadn't corrected him. What if staying just for a little while longer wasn't as dangerous as she feared, and even more terrifying? What if it was? Eleanor hadn't meant to return. That evening, she sat behind the tinted windows of her SUV watching a modest brick building across the street, a walk-up apartment with peeling paint and a flickering porch light. She hadn't told her driver to stop. She just hadn't told him to keep going. Inside, past the cracked blinds of a second-story window, a warm yellow light glowed. Faint laughter filtered through the chilly autumn air. And though she couldn't see clearly, she knew it was them. Jack, Tommy, the boy who had asked her to stay, and the man, who hadn't asked for anything at all. "Should I continue, Ms. Grant?" her driver asked carefully. Eleanor didn't answer. She opened the door. It started as a coincidence. She stopped by the school again, dropped off a book she thought Tommy might enjoy, something about space and tigers and time travel. The next week she was just passing through the park at recess. Then she found herself at the tiny corner grocery across from Jack's apartment comparing brands of instant mac and cheese with no intention of buying either. He noticed, of course. "You lost. Again," Jack teased gently one afternoon, leaning against the bike rack with Tommy on his shoulders. "Or is this just where all the billionaires hang out nowadays? I was buying groceries," Eleanor replied flatly. "You didn't actually buy anything." She paused. "I changed my mind." Tommy leaned down from his perch, grinning. "She just likes us, Dad. You can say hi." Jack smirked. "That obvious, huh?" Eleanor turned to Tommy. "What makes you think I like you?" "You don't wear your sunglasses when you're with us," he said matter-of-factly. "That's how I know you're not hiding." Her lips curved just slightly. She hated how easily he disarmed her. Jack set Tommy down. "We're about to eat dinner. It's just spaghetti. You hungry?" Eleanor hesitated. She had a reservation at a steakhouse downtown, a phone full of emails, and at least 2 fund managers waiting for her approval on a merger. She had an empire to run. And yet I could eat. Their apartment was smaller than her walk-in closet. A narrow hallway led into a living room where the furniture was mismatched, the wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the heat came from a portable radiator buzzing near the window. But it was warm, lived in, safe. The table was a fold-out card table with 3 chairs. Jack boiled spaghetti in a scratched-up pot while Tommy gave Eleanor a grand tour of his room, which doubled as a storage closet and a spaceship depending on the day. "Sorry about the mess," Jack said, setting out plates. "We were going to clean this weekend." "It's fine," Eleanor replied, settling into the chair. "I'm not here for the decor." Tommy dug into his food with enthusiasm, strands of spaghetti hanging from his chin like red streamers. Eleanor watched him, strangely mesmerized. She hadn't eaten at a kitchen table without a linen napkin and a waiter in years. Jack sat across from her. "So, how does someone like you end up spending time with people like us?" "People like you," she repeated, eyebrow raised. "You know what I mean. We're not exactly in your tax bracket." Eleanor's fork paused midair. Then she set it down. "I don't remember the last time someone looked me in the eye and just spoke." Jack tilted his head. "That's sad." "No," she said. "It's honest." He studied her then, not the way the press did, not the way her board members did, calculating leverage. He looked at her like a person, and she felt exposed. She cleared her throat. "Tommy's a good kid." Jack smiled softly. "He's everything." A silence settled between them, comfortable but heavy with unsaid things. Eleanor finally asked, "You ever think about starting over?" Jack leaned back in his chair. "Starting over sounds expensive." "It doesn't have to be." He chuckled. "No offense, but in your world even breathing costs extra." "I mean it." Her voice softened. "You deserve more than this." His expression changed. Not offended, not grateful. Just tired. "I'm not looking for more," he said. "I'm looking for enough." Eleanor blinked. "That's not something I hear often." He met her eyes. "That's because you don't spend much time with people who've lost everything." The air between them shifted. She felt it, the weight of his words, the gravity of survival. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't defeated. He was just real. "I lost my sister," she said suddenly, "to postpartum depression. She didn't tell anyone until it was too late." Jack's features softened. "I'm sorry." "She was the kind one," Eleanor whispered. "The brave one. I built empires to forget her. But some things don't stay buried." He didn't offer her comfort. He didn't say, "It gets better." He just sat there, with her, in the mess of it. Tommy broke the silence. "Do you think I'll be tall when I grow up?" he asked, eyes big and hopeful. Jack grinned. "Taller than me." "That's for sure. I want to be strong, like Daddy." Tommy added, then looked at Eleanor. "And smart like you." She blinked. Something sharp and sweet twisted in her chest. After dinner, as she stood in the doorway pulling on her coat, Tommy wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you gonna come back?" he whispered. Eleanor crouched, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Do you want me to?" He nodded hard. She looked up at Jack. He didn't say a word. He didn't plead or ask or push. He just stood there, letting her choose. And that's what made it so unbearable. He never once asked for her to stay, and for the first time in her life, she wanted someone to. The rain started softly, barely more than mist, but by the time Eleanor stepped out of the boardroom, it had thickened into a steady downpour. Her driver was delayed, and she had left her umbrella in the office, a rare lapse in preparation. But she didn't turn back. She walked, heels clicking against the wet pavement, hair slowly darkening from the drizzle. Eleanor Grant made her way through a part of town she never had reason to visit before. The buildings here weren't made of glass and ambition. They were brick and memory, worn, imperfect, lived in. She told herself she didn't know why her feet were moving in this direction, but she knew. She wanted to see them again. The apartment door opened to the smell of tomato sauce and something faintly burnt. Tommy's face lit up the moment he saw her. "You came back," he shouted, arms flinging around her waist with no hesitation. "I didn't bring dessert," Eleanor warned, a small smile tugging at her lips. "That's okay," he said. "We saved you a seat." Jack appeared in the doorway of the kitchen holding a wooden spoon and wearing an apron that said chef-ish. His eyebrows lifted in amusement. "Rough day at the office, or are you auditioning for the next shampoo commercial?" Eleanor looked down. Her designer blouse was soaked through, clinging to her skin. "I walked," she said simply. Jack stared at her for a beat longer than necessary. Not judgmental, not curious, just surprised. "I'll get you a towel." She stepped inside, slipping off her wet coat. The apartment smelled like real life. Laundry soap, garlic, crayons, everything her penthouse lacked. Tommy tugged at her hand. "Come see the spaceship we made." Eleanor let him pull her down the hallway. His room, barely big enough for a twin mattress and a box of toys, had transformed. Blankets were draped over chairs. Flashlights illuminated the cockpit. Paper stars dangled from string. "This is amazing," she said. "We're going to Jupiter," Tommy announced. "You can be the co-pilot. I've never been to Jupiter." He grinned. "Neither have we." That's the fun part. Dinner was chaos. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, and the garlic bread was more charcoal than golden. Eleanor sat at the fold-out table with a paper napkin in her lap and a plastic cup of tap water. Tommy told stories with his mouth full. Jack asked her if she knew the difference between basil and oregano, then laughed when she didn't. "You're not what I expected," Jack said later after Tommy had fallen asleep in a pile of comic books. "And what exactly did you expect? I don't know." He leaned back in the creaky chair. "Someone colder, sharper, someone who doesn't get spaghetti sauce on her blouse." She looked down. A red smear bloomed near her collar. "I haven't had a meal without a meeting attached to it in 5 years," she said. Jack tilted his head. "Do you ever get tired of all that? What success?" "No. Being alone in a room full of people who only want what you can give them." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway where Tommy was sleeping. "I used to think being needed was dangerous," she said quietly. "That if someone needed me, they could hurt me. And now I think, maybe not being needed at all is worse." Jack didn't speak. He just reached over and gently refilled her cup with water. Not wine, not some expensive label, just water. And for some reason, it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. Later, she stood by the door coat, dry now, hair frizzing at the edges. Jack leaned against the frame beside her. "He asked about you this morning," he said. "Tommy. Wanted to know if you were still his just-for-a-day mommy. What did you say? I told him the truth." Jack met her gaze. "That I don't know." Eleanor swallowed. The words settled deep, more honest than she was ready for. "He's getting attached," Jack added gently. "I just need to know if this is something real for you. Because it is for him." "I don't know how to do this," Eleanor admitted. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to show up. That's simple." And yet the weight of it was enormous. She nodded once, then looked up at him, eyes darker now in the soft hallway light. "I don't want to be another person who walks away." Jack's voice was quiet, steady. "Then don't." That night, back in her penthouse, Eleanor stared out the window. The city was alive beneath her, glittering and ceaseless. But for the first time it felt far away, like another planet. She walked to her bookshelf. Rows of leather-bound volumes, books on finance, leadership, case studies, and power. She slid one off the shelf and placed it on the table. Then she picked up a crayon drawing Tommy had slipped into her bag earlier that evening. It was the three of them. Stick figures smiling. A tall one in a suit, a smaller one with a crown, and a tiny figure with curly hair holding both their hands. Above them, written in crooked, colorful letters, "My family, just for now." Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Something inside her whispered, Just for now doesn't have to stay just for now. But could she really let herself believe in that? Could she, after all this time, trust the quiet, messy, imperfect kind of love that didn't come with contracts or conditions? Eleanor Grant had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants with chandeliers worth more than some people's homes. She'd sat across from King's presidents and hedge fund titans, her expression unreadable, her words perfectly timed. But tonight she found herself in a tiny, dimly lit kitchen eating reheated pizza from a mismatched plate with a 6-year-old beside her who insisted she try dipping it in ketchup. And for some reason, it felt like the most human thing she'd done in years. "You know ketchup," Eleanor said, eyeing the bottle with genuine concern. Tommy looked scandalized. "That's the best part." Jack chuckled from the counter where he was rinsing dishes in the sink that dripped steadily with a rhythmic plink-plink sound. "She's a fancy lady, Bud. Probably eats pizza with a knife and fork." "I do not," Eleanor said, then paused. "Okay, maybe once. In Geneva." Tommy laughed so hard he nearly choked on his crust. Jack tossed her a clean dish towel. "Try not to kill our guest, all right?" he said, ruffling Tommy's curls. Eleanor caught the towel with a soft smile and dabbed at the boy's chin. He leaned into her hand without hesitation, and her heart twisted again in that same unfamiliar way it had been twisting ever since that morning at the cafe. She didn't understand how this child, this family had carved out a space inside her so quickly, so deeply. But the longer she stayed, the more it scared her, and the more it mattered. After dinner, Tommy declared that it was movie night. "We watch The Iron Giant when we've had a good day," he announced. "It's our rule." Jack raised an eyebrow at Eleanor. "You're in luck. It was a good day." She wanted to ask for whom, but instead she just nodded. They piled onto the couch, Tommy between them, arms full of blankets and a stuffed tiger with one eye missing. The movie flickered onto the screen, painting their faces in soft blue light. Tommy's laughter came easily, but Eleanor found herself watching him more than the film. At one point, Jack looked over, caught her staring. What she asked, embarrassed. Nothing he said. "You just don't look like you're pretending." "I'm not." He nodded, then turned back to the screen. Good. She didn't know what that meant, but it felt like something. Later, after the movie ended and Tommy had fallen asleep curled between them, Jack gently lifted him in his arms and carried him to bed. Eleanor followed behind, pausing in the doorway as Jack pulled the blanket up to his son's chin. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked quietly. Jack looked at her, then back at Tommy. "Every day. Of what? Losing him, failing him, not being enough." Eleanor leaned against the frame. "But you're here. Every day. That has to count for something." Jack stood. His voice was lower now, edged with something raw. "I used to think showing up was the bare minimum. But it's everything. Because the world doesn't wait for you. It doesn't care if you're tired or broke or grieving. If you don't show up, it moves on without you." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're a good father, Jack." He looked at her. "And you're not what I expected." There was silence, thick but not uncomfortable. Then she said, "I don't know how to belong to something I didn't build." "You don't build families," he said. "You love them." And with that, he turned off the light. Back in the living room, Eleanor lingered. Her coat was folded neatly over the armrest. Her phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls and emails she had no desire to return. Jack came back out drying his hands on a towel. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think people like you didn't feel things like the rest of us. And now I think you feel everything. You've just gotten really good at hiding it." Eleanor laughed softly. "You're too perceptive for someone who owns 3 shirts." He smirked. "Hey, 4. I bought a new one at Goodwill last week." She stared at him. The man in front of her was unlike anyone she'd ever known. No pretense, no performance, just truth, and it humbled her more than any boardroom defeat ever could. "What if I don't know how to stay?" she asked. Jack didn't move, didn't flinch, just said quietly, "Then start with dinner." Her breath caught. "Dinner," she repeated. "Come back tomorrow, bring something terrible. Or don't. Just show up. No pressure, no roles, no pretending." She nodded, unsure if she was agreeing to dinner or to something much bigger. That night, as she lay in bed, no city skyline, no glass walls, no designer sheets, just the pull-out couch and the faint sound of rain against the windows. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, sleep came easily. Meanwhile, in the next room, Jack watched his son sleep and whispered, "She stayed." And in the quiet that followed, a thought settled in his chest like a question wrapped in hope. It started with a photo. Just a blurry, overexposed shot on someone's phone. Eleanor Grant stepping out of a rundown apartment building in Brooklyn, holding the hand of a little boy. No security detail. No press statement. No explanation. And no one to stop the wildfire once it began. By noon the next day, her name was trending. Eleanor Grant, secret life billionaire CEO, playing house in the projects, who is the child beside Eleanor Grant. Within hours, gossip blogs, finance sites, and even national news outlets had picked it up. They dissected her clothing the neighborhood the timestamp. Some speculated she had an illegitimate child. Others claimed it was a PR move. A few dug into Jack Miller's name and found mercifully little. He had no social media, no scandal, just tax records and a small mountain of debt. By the time Eleanor saw the headlines, it was too late. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up for dinner that night. Tommy sat on the couch swinging his legs, glancing at the door every few minutes. "Maybe she got busy," Jack said, gently setting down a plate of grilled cheese that went untouched. "She said she'd come," Tommy whispered. "She promised." And Jack, who had spent years teaching his son that people leave for all kinds of reasons, had no idea how to explain this one. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, Jack opened the door to find her standing there. No bodyguards, no makeup, no shield, just Eleanor. She looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice small. Tommy, hearing her voice, came running. He froze in the hallway, unsure, as if afraid she might disappear if he blinked. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "I'm so sorry." He ran into her arms. Later, after Tommy had fallen asleep with his head on her lap and the weight of disappointment lifted from his tiny chest, Jack stood in the kitchen pouring 2 mugs of coffee. His eyes never left her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I didn't want this part of my life to feel like a transaction," she said. Jack handed her a mug. "You think I'd have treated you differently if I'd known you were a billionaire?" She looked up. "Wouldn't you have?" He didn't blink. "No, because I never cared about your last name, Eleanor. I cared about how Tommy smiled around you, about how you looked at him like he was more than a side note." She swallowed hard. "It's been a long time since anyone saw me without the title." "You know what I see," Jack said. "A woman who showed up, who sat on my busted couch and let a 6-year-old cover her in glitter. That woman, she's real." She laughed, eyes wet. "You're not going to give me a lecture." "No," he sipped his coffee, "but I will give you a question." She waited. "What do you want this to be?" The words landed with terrifying clarity. "I don't know," she said. "Then figure it out," he replied, "before someone else tries to define it for you." But the world didn't wait. That weekend, a black SUV pulled up outside the apartment. A man in a gray suit stepped out and handed Jack an envelope. It was a formal notice from a corporate oversight committee. Eleanor Grant's presence in the media connected to an emotionally vulnerable civilian and minor was now considered a reputational risk to her firm's image and holdings. Inside was a warning. Any continued association with Mr. Jack Miller and his child outside of officially sanctioned charity or PR efforts may result in shareholder inquiry and board review. Jack stared at the paper. When Eleanor arrived that evening, he didn't say hello. He just handed her the letter. She read it in silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it back. "I didn't authorize this," she said. "But you built the machine that did," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. "I can fight it," she said quickly. "I can fix this." Jack looked at her for a long, long time. "Can you?" he asked. "Because the next time someone decides we're inconvenient, I don't want my son left wondering if he mattered." Eleanor stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't pretend like I don't care." Jack's voice cracked. "I know you care. That's the problem. Because for the first time in a long time, I care too." They stood there on opposite sides of the living room, closer than ever, and miles apart. "I didn't ask for this," Eleanor whispered. "No." Jack said, voice low, "But you answered anyway." That night she didn't stay. Tommy kissed her goodbye with sleepy eyes and an innocent heart that didn't yet understand how complicated grown-up love could be. Jack watched her go without a word. Back in her penthouse, Eleanor stood at the window overlooking the city she used to think she ruled. And for the first time she wondered if everything she had built was too fragile to hold the one thing she wanted most. Not control, not reputation, but belonging. Real, unconditional, messy belonging. And she didn't know how to protect it. Not from the world, and not from herself. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, just Jack Miller's name scrawled in a stiff, lawyerly font. The moment he opened it, his breath stopped. Petition for guardianship. Filed by Daniel Marks, biological uncle, to Thomas Miller. Jack sat at the kitchen table unmoving as the coffee in his mug cooled. Tommy was in the other room humming along to a cartoon. Life was still normal on the surface, but Jack knew what this meant. Daniel. The ghost from a past he had tried so hard to leave buried. He hadn't seen Daniel in over 6 years, not since the funeral. Jack had stood at the edge of a cemetery holding his infant son, while Elisa's brother accused him of being the reason she was gone. "You weren't enough for her." Daniel had spat, voice shaking with grief and fury. "You'll never be enough for him." And now he was back. Eleanor read the papers in silence that evening, her jaw clenched tight. "I'll take care of this," she said flatly. "We'll hire the best custody attorney in New York. We'll end it before it begins." Jack shook his head. "It's not just legal. It's personal. He wants to hurt me." "He doesn't get to win," she said, eyes burning. He looked at her. "This isn't your fight, Eleanor." She stepped closer. "It is now." He said nothing, but the flicker in his eyes, part gratitude, part fear, spoke volumes. Daniel arrived at the first hearing in a tailored gray suit, flanked by a sharp-tongued lawyer who spoke with the calculated calm of someone used to tearing families apart and charging by the hour for it. Jack wore the only suit he owned. It had once belonged to his father. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was clean. Eleanor sat behind him, silent and still a force without needing to say a word. When Tommy entered the room holding his father's hand, the judge smiled faintly. "Hello, Thomas," the judge said. "Thank you for being here today." Tommy nodded solemnly, then looked up at Jack and whispered, "Are we going to be okay?" Jack gripped his son's hand. "Always." But the courtroom was a cold place for hope. Daniel's lawyer painted Jack as unstable, an underemployed handyman with no college degree, no health insurance, no stable home. She hinted at emotional damage, financial recklessness, even suggesting Eleanor's presence was a manipulative strategy. Then Daniel stood. "I only want what's best for my nephew," he said smoothly. "Blood matters. Stability matters." He paused dramatically, eyes skimming the room. "Your Honor, this man is struggling to survive. How can he provide a future for a child when he's barely holding on?" Jack didn't speak. He didn't flinch, but his fingers curled tightly in his lap. Then Eleanor rose. Her voice was clear, sharp, unapologetic. I've worked with world leaders. I've built billion-dollar companies, and I have never in my life seen anyone more committed to another human being than Jack Miller is to his son." The courtroom fell silent. He doesn't throw money at problems because he doesn't have money. He throws himself. Fully. Without ego. Without excuse. And in a world addicted to shortcuts and appearances, I'd argue that's the very definition of strength. She turned to the judge. "If love matters in this court, and I hope to God it does, then this man deserves to keep his child." The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. Then he asked, "Has the child expressed any preference?" Tommy stood. No one told him to. No one asked. But he walked to the front of the room, chin-trembling hands clenched at his sides. "My name is Tommy," he said clearly, "and I already have a dad." There was a sharp gasp somewhere in the back. Daniel's lawyer started to object, but the judge silenced her with a glance. Tommy kept going. "He reads to me every night. He holds my hand when I'm scared. He doesn't have a big house or a fancy car, but he never leaves, even when he's tired, even when I'm being annoying." He turned and pointed to Jack. "I pick him." Then he looked at Eleanor. "And I pick her too. Not because she buys me stuff, but because she listens." His voice cracked. "They make me feel safe. And you shouldn't take that away." When he finished, he walked back to Jack, climbed into his lap, and didn't say another word. The judge cleared his throat, eyes soft but firm. In light of the testimony presented and the clear emotional bond between the child and Mr. Miller, the petition for guardianship is denied. The gavel came down like thunder. Daniel's shoulders sagged. His lawyer muttered something under her breath and began packing up. Jack exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Eleanor reached out and squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, voice hoarse. "We did." Outside the courthouse, Eleanor stood under the sun watching Tommy skip ahead on the sidewalk, free and unburdened. Jack looked at her. "You didn't have to stand with us." "Yes, I did," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because you're the first thing in my life that's felt real in a long time." He stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. And she added softly, "And I'm tired of letting real things go." That night, as they sat at the kitchen table eating takeout from a paper bag, Tommy held up a fortune cookie and read it aloud. It says, "Family is not who you're born to. It's who you hold on to." He looked up, grinning. "I think that's about us." Jack laughed. Eleanor did too. But in her chest, something steadied, settled, because the battle wasn't just for custody, it was for belief. And now, finally, she believed. They didn't celebrate with champagne. There was no party, no applause. Just a quiet evening in Jack's apartment, a homemade banner that read, "We did it," in Tommy's handwriting, and 3 paper crowns from a dollar store. Eleanor wore hers the entire night. Jack pretended to protest, but she caught the smile he tried to hide. And Tommy, he acted like it was his coronation. They had won. But what they hadn't realized was that something deeper had shifted, something beyond the courtroom. Eleanor came by more frequently now, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as if she belonged. She'd bring soup when Jack worked late, stay for bedtime stories, sit through cartoons she pretended not to enjoy. Her heels sat by the front door now, next to Jack's worn boots and Tommy's light-up sneakers. "You should just move in," Tommy said one night as she tucked him in. Eleanor blinked. "That's a big suggestion." He shrugged. "You're here all the time. You make Dad smile more. And you don't burn the grilled cheese like he does." She laughed. "Well, that's quite the resume." He looked at her, small and serious. "People leave, but you didn't. That's why I think you're already kind of our family." Eleanor sat there, her heart thudding quietly, the weight of his words heavier than anything she'd negotiated in a boardroom. She brushed his hair back and whispered, "Thank you for picking me." The next day, Eleanor made a decision she never thought she would. She called a meeting with the board of her company. "You all know who I am," she began. "You know what I've built. But I've realized something: what we build means nothing if we're too afraid to live inside it." She paused, scanning the room of suits and silence. "I'm stepping back from daily operations." Murmurs rippled through the room like a wave. "I'll remain chairwoman, but the day-to-day will be managed by the people I trust. I'm starting something new, a foundation, one focused on second chances for families who've been overlooked." Someone tried to interrupt. "I'm not asking for permission," she said, calm and firm. "This isn't a retreat, it's a return to the kind of life I want." And with that, she walked out. The building didn't collapse, the empire didn't crumble. The world kept turning. But Eleanor Grant, for the first time, felt like she was finally facing the right direction. That weekend, Jack planned something special. A dinner. Not fancy, not expensive, just thoughtful. He set the table with 3 mismatched plates, made roasted chicken with help from a YouTube chef who talked too fast, lit candles that smelled vaguely of cinnamon. When Eleanor walked in, she paused at the doorway. Jack stood in the kitchen wearing an apron that said, "Official Taste Tester." He held up a spoon. "Don't judge, it's probably overcooked." She walked to him slowly, her gaze soft. "It's perfect," she said. And she wasn't talking about the food. They sat down, the 3 of them, laughter echoing through the tiny apartment as if it had more square footage than it knew what to do with. Halfway through dinner, Tommy jumped up and ran to his backpack. "I made something," he declared. He returned holding a folded piece of paper, edges wrinkled and covered in crayon. He laid it on the table. On the page were 3 stick figures, one tall with a crown, one medium with a beard, one tiny with a cape. Above them, in shaky letters, "Me Daddy and my family." Beneath that, smaller words, "Forever. Not just for a day." Eleanor's breath caught. Jack looked at her. "I think he knows," he said softly. She nodded, her voice thin. "So do I." Later that night, as Jack walked her to her car, the air was cool, the sky above them clear. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Not again." She looked up at him. "Why didn't you ever ask for more?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't think I deserved more." She stepped closer. "You do. You always did." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "What about you? Did you ever think you'd let someone in?" She smiled, eyes glassy. "Only when I stopped being afraid of what it would cost." They stood there in the stillness, the city buzzing somewhere far away, 2 souls quietly choosing each other. The next morning, Tommy ran out the front door, holding a small envelope with a red heart sticker. "I want to mail it to the foundation," he yelled. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Mail what?" Tommy grinned. "My first donation." Inside was a $1 bill and 2 quarters. "For the next kid who needs a family," he said. "Like I did." Eleanor knelt beside him, tears threatening to spill. "Tommy," she whispered, "you didn't just find a family. You helped build one." He wrapped his arms around her. "I love you, Miss Eleanor." She held him tighter. "You can drop the miss," she said, her voice breaking. And in that moment the world felt impossibly wide and beautifully small all at once. The restaurant was small, tucked between 2 brownstones in a quiet corner of the city. From the outside it didn't look like much, just a single flickering lantern above a weathered wooden door and windows fogged with warmth. But inside the space had been transformed. Fairy lights traced the ceiling beams. A small round table sat in the center of the room, set for 3. White linen soft candles and plates that gleamed in the candlelight. On each a handwritten place card: Jack, Tommy, Eleanor. Jack adjusted the cuffs of his one good dress shirt, shifting nervously in the doorway. Eleanor stood beside him, radiant in a dark green dress, not because it shimmered, but because she didn't try to. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a hint of rose on her cheeks. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. Jack looked at her. "I didn't want just another night. I wanted one we'd remember." She smiled. You're getting good at this. Dinner. He smirked. Showing up, she said. Tommy ran ahead gasping when he saw the cupcakes on the dessert tray. Do they have the kind with crunchy stuff on top? He asked the server, eyes wide. They do, now Jack said with a wink. Tommy laughed so hard he knocked over his water glass and Eleanor caught it mid-tip. Still got it, she said, raising a brow at Jack. He chuckled. You always did. As they sat, the conversation flowed the way it only could between people who had already lived through the hard parts. They didn't talk about the courtroom or the press or the foundation that Eleanor had just opened last week. They talked about Tommy's latest school project dinosaurs, the strange noise the sink was making again, and whether or not pineapple belonged on pizza. It absolutely does, Tommy insisted, waving his fork for emphasis. Jack shook his head. That's sacrilege. Eleanor leaned in, stage whispering to Tommy, You're outnumbered, but morally correct. Tommy grinned like he'd just won a debate on national television. As the main course cleared, Eleanor reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, elegant box wrapped in silver paper. I have something for you, she said, sliding it across to Tommy. For me, he gasped. Jack leaned forward, curious. Eleanor simply nodded. Tommy opened it slowly as if afraid to ruin the wrapping. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, small and simple. A circular charm hung from the center engraved with one word, family. He turned it over. On the back, forever. His hands trembled. It's for me. Eleanor's voice softened. You taught me what that word really means. I wanted you to have something that reminds you that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place with me. Tommy stood up, climbed into her lap without hesitation, and wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. You're my forever, too. Jack watched something raw and wordless flickering in his eyes. Later, when the dishes had been cleared and Tommy was half asleep in his seat, Eleanor reached into her coat and pulled out a second box, this one smaller. She stood. Jack, she said softly, I don't know how to do this the way others do. I've never written love songs. I don't bake. I barely know how to make coffee. He stood, slowly, heart-thudding. But you showed me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfection. It's about presence, about showing up when it's messy and loud and inconvenient, about choosing each other again and again. She opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, a single stone. No glitter, no pretense, just something real. I don't want temporary. I don't want convenient. I want real. I want us, if you'll have me. For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then he stepped forward, cupped her face in both hands, and whispered, I already do. They kissed, and somewhere between candlelight and tears, time stood still. Tommy, who had roused just enough to witness the moment, leapt up and shouted, Can I be the flower boy? Jack laughed, pulling him into a hug. You're gonna be more than that, buddy. That night, Jack walked Eleanor to her car. The air was crisp and the street was quiet. You've changed everything, he said softly. She looked at him. No, you did. They stood there for a beat, hands intertwined the world around them, fading. And then Jack asked the question he hadn't dared before. What if we really could have all of it? Eleanor smiled. Then let's build it. Somewhere not far away, a child in a shelter held a flyer from the Second Chance Foundation, a new name in a world that rarely offered new beginnings. A name that promised not charity but dignity, not pity but possibility. And one day soon, they too would find a family not the one they were born into, but the one who chose them. Just like Jack. Just like Eleanor. Just like Tommy. They didn't announce it with headlines, no press releases, no viral posts. But those who knew them, really knew them, could feel the shift. Something in Eleanor's voice had softened. Something in Jack's step had steadied. And Tommy had started drawing four-person families in school. He'd added a dog and a backyard. It began like most real things do, not with a grand moment, but with a quiet decision. One morning, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror holding a box. Inside was the ring Jack had placed on her finger weeks ago, still glowing with promise, still heavy with meaning. But beside it now lay a new key. To a home they hadn't built yet. A life they hadn't lived yet. But one they were choosing, brick by brick. She smiled, closed the box, and turned toward her future. Their wedding was nothing like the society pages imagined it would be. No cathedral, no orchestra, no guest list of CEOs and senators. Just a garden behind their new home, modest, sunlit, and blooming with white roses that Tommy insisted on picking himself. Jack stood under a wooden arch he had built with his own hands. His suit wasn't expensive, but it was clean and pressed, and he'd worn the tie Tommy picked out a slightly crooked clip-on with cartoon dolphins. Eleanor walked toward him in a simple ivory dress. No diamonds, no veil, just a single yellow flower tucked behind her ear, Tommy's doing again. When she reached him, Jack whispered, "You look like peace." She smiled. "And you look like home." They didn't read rehearsed vows. They didn't need to. Jack took her hands, his voice rough with emotion. "I spent so long thinking love was about sacrifice, about holding everything and proving I could survive. But then you walked into our lives and showed me that love isn't about enduring. It's about healing. It's about choosing." Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "I thought building empires would protect me," she said. "That if I was powerful enough, nothing could hurt me. But you undid all of that with kindness, with presence. You made room in your world for a woman who didn't even know how to belong." Tommy stood beside them, bouncing slightly with excitement, holding the rings in a velvet box he'd almost dropped twice. "Can I say my part now?" he whispered, not so quietly. Everyone laughed. Jack nodded. Tommy cleared his throat, trying to sound older than 6. "I just want to say, I picked both of you first, before the rings, before the dress, before the cupcakes. I picked you because you make each other better, and you make me feel like the luckiest kid in the world. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden." Eleanor leaned down and kissed Tommy's forehead. "You're the reason we're here." Jack slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, and she did the same. The officiant didn't need to ask. The "I do" was in the way they looked at each other, in the silence that held the weight of everything they'd already lived through and everything still to come. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot in the grass. No music, just laughter. Tommy twirled Eleanor until they both fell down dizzy. Jack kissed her like the world wasn't watching. And maybe for once, it wasn't. Later that evening, after guests had left and candles burned low, Jack stood in the doorway of their new home, looking out at the stars. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled without turning. "That I used to be afraid of falling. And now I know I've already landed." She stepped beside him. "We built this, didn't we?" He nodded. "And we get to keep building." Inside, Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing his little bow tie arms wrapped around a stuffed dog Eleanor had given him with a tag that read, "For all your adventures." Jack covered him with a blanket, then turned to Eleanor. "He's everything. So are you." He tilted his head. "And you." She leaned into him. "I'm home." That night the house was quiet but full of dreams and warmth and new beginnings. The kind that don't need to be announced, only lived. In bedtime stories, in burnt pancakes, in shared silence and unexpected laughter. This wasn't the ending. This was the life they had all stopped daring to wish for, and now finally had the courage to claim. It happened slowly, like spring slipping into a long, frozen room. There was no dramatic fanfare, no cinematic swell, just warmth, gradual, steady, and real. They never circled a date on the calendar that marked when they became a family. There was no specific moment that said, "Here. This is when everything changed." Because the truth was, it changed quietly in pieces. In the way Tommy began to call her mom without hesitation, as if the word had simply been waiting for the right voice. In how Eleanor instinctively packed 2 extra granola bars in her bag, one for Jack, one for the boy who had once only asked her to pretend. And in the way, Jack for the first time in years began to hum while making coffee like a man who had nothing to prove, and everything to look forward to. Life wasn't perfect. Their sink still leaked. Tommy still insisted on wearing mismatched socks. Jack still burned toast. Eleanor still checked her email more often than she should. But now they were woven together in the smallest ways. In the shared toothbrush cup. In the coats hung side by the door. In the way Jack reached for Eleanor's hand when she wasn't looking, and she always held on. One Saturday morning, Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter, her hair messy, wearing Jack's oversized hoodie, reading a sticky note from Tommy that said, "Don't forget parent show and tell today. Bring something cool." She looked at Jack, who was feeding their rescue dog, aptly named Chance, and said, "I don't think a balance sheet will impress a room of first graders." He grinned. "You could show them how to buy a company. Or, I could show them how to make homemade slime," she said with mock horror, pulling out a small jar from the fridge. "Tommy said it's your greatest achievement." "It is," Jack said solemnly. "My legacy." They laughed. It was the kind of laugh that stays with you deep familiar and without defense. At school, Tommy stood tall in front of his class, a shy but proud smile on his face. "These are my parents," he said, pointing to Jack and Eleanor. "And this," he held up the jar of blue glittery goo, "is their slime. They made it together and only fought a little." The room erupted in laughter. Even Eleanor couldn't help herself. Tommy continued, voice softer now, but sure. "They told me family means you choose each other. Every day. So I picked them. And they picked me back." On the drive home, Jack reached across the console, linked his fingers with Eleanor's, and said, "You know, I used to think I had to survive alone. That love was for other people." Eleanor glanced at him. "What changed? You did." She squeezed his hand. "No, Jack. We did. Together." In the months that followed, life unfolded gently. The Second Chance Foundation grew into something bigger than they imagined. Not just a nonprofit, but a lifeline. They helped single parents find stable housing-funded scholarships for kids who had been overlooked and built a community around the belief that no one should be punished for starting over. At the grand opening of their new community center, Tommy stood with a ribbon in one hand and a pair of giant scissors in the other. "Are you ready?" Eleanor whispered. Tommy looked up at her, beaming. "Let's do it." He cut the ribbon, and the crowd cheered. But more than that, more than the applause and the photos, was the look in Jack's eyes as he pulled them both into a hug. That look said, "We made this. From nothing. From broken pieces. From hope. And it was enough. More than enough." One evening, under the golden haze of a fading sunset, Eleanor sat on their front steps watching Jack and Tommy race down the block with Chance barking wildly behind them. She sipped her tea, slowly, letting the silence stretch comfortable now, not lonely. Jack jogged back, panting. "Tommy beat me," he said, breathless. "He's got your stubbornness and my need to win." Eleanor replied, grinning. "We're doomed." Jack plopped down beside her. "You ever think about how this all started? A bottle of water, a cashier, a little boy with a very big question." Jack looked at her, the softness in his eyes almost too much to bear. "That one question changed my life. Mine, too." They sat there for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the boy they loved more than life itself chase after stars only he could see. That night, as they tucked Tommy into bed, he looked up at them sleepily. "Thanks for staying," he murmured. Eleanor leaned down, kissed his forehead. "Always." Jack whispered, "Even when the slime explodes." Tommy giggled already, halfway to dreams. Outside, the sky was endless. Inside, a family rested whole, safe, and chosen. Because love, when real, doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it knocks, once waits patiently and asks only one thing. would you stay? And when you do, when you choose to stay, not just for a day but for a lifetime, you find the kind of forever that no storm, no silence, and no past can ever take away. Because in the end, family isn't who you're born to, it's who you become for each other. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not the grand gestures, but the quiet moments, the choice to stay, the courage to begin again, and the grace to build something beautiful together. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear what part moved you most. Leave a comment below. Your words mean more than you know. And if you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and love that chooses us when we least expect it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss another story that speaks to the soul. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.